welcome back to the episode. So like I said in the intro, we're speaking to someone today who is a longtime friend of mine, someone who I met initially through the punk and hardcore scene and then have gotten also to know as like this great business professional and a great leader. So with that, James, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. I'm excited to be on here and a little nervous, to be honest.
Respect. It's interesting when you know someone like personally for so many years. And then at one point you're like, oh yeah, like this person is like a real person outside of punk and hardcore and they have like a life and like kids and a career.
Yeah. It's funny. I was actually looking at some old photos and I got this great photo of you like in the middle of Rhode Island with Champion jumping. Like, I'm just like that's such a great shot. And I was thinking about bringing it and sharing it for this podcast, but I decided not to, sorry. But I'll send it over. I'll email it.
Please send it over. I assume that I look either totally cool or horrendous. It's like that's like this interview has started off on the right foot already. All right, man. So for the uninitiated, for the people who don't know, I know in the intro I said your job title, but what does that really mean? What do you do in your role? And tell us just a bit about the company too.
Yeah. So Elmo Motion Control is a partnership that we build and a design or manufacture of servo drives. And we are very high throughput, very small in surface area per square footage. And we work on a higher end with actually a very wide variety of applications, anywhere working with NASA to animatronics to surgical robotics to semiconductors. I mean, so we're very diversified in our portfolio.
Okay, hold on a second. Break that down for the punks. Like, what does that actually mean? What does Elmo Motion Control do? What do you make? And like, what are the applications?
Absolutely. So we make what looks like a little PCB board that's got some microchips on it, and I'm really breaking it down here. And it is essentially the brains that make things move. So if you have a robot that is picking things up and moving it around, it's our chip that allows that extremely accurate and precise precision of it picking up and moving it through logic and code. So it's either done through hardware, which is our bread and butter, but also our software, which allows it to talk to a controller of some sort. And we are we move a lot of different industries. Literally, that's what we do. So anything that's got movement or what we call motion control, that's where we are. Motion control is my background. I started off in fluid, which is like pneumatics or hydraulics, which is something that we're all familiar with. You blow something with air, you have a blow gun and you press that little thing. There's a little valve in there that says release the air. And when you let go, it says stop the air. So motion control is much like that, but it's done through electromechanical. Sends a circuit, whatever that wattage may be, and says, hey, do this, do that, but very precise and extremely accurate. And it's a closed loop. So you're getting feedback to some sort of system in case there's safety functions or alarms or whatever you need. So that's pretty much what we do.
Awesome. Okay. Now we know. I have to ask a question that every child of the 80s is thinking right now. How close are we to the Terminator? Like, is Judgment Day coming?
I literally said yesterday in a meeting, I'm not joking. I literally said there's this one company that's actually on the West Coast, not too far where you guys are located, that is doing amazing things. And they have robots that don't look like Terminator so much, but have you ever seen the Will Smith iRobot movie? I think it's on iRobot. I think that's they look a bit like that. And I said, man, if those eyes go from blue to red, I'm going to be scared, and it's amazing what people are doing. And we work at the ground level with a lot of the universities, from some of the Canadian universities to a lot of the prestige colleges here in the USA. And to see these kids turn amazing things over 5, 10, 20 years, it's super cool to be at the tip of the spear of technology. And I'm very proud of my team and what they do. I got a wicked smart team. It makes me feel silly dumb at times.
Okay. Well, all right. Speaking of iRobot, do you remember the face of the robot in iRobot?
Yes.
There's a name and there's a band, and I'll leave the band unnamed. They were on Hydra Head, and one of the members of the band had the same face as the face of the robot on iRobot.
I think I know who you're talking about.
It messed me up, man. Like I was like, oh, damn, it's iRobot. Like, yo, and I'd just be like, well, hello, whatever this guy's name is. And I was like, what's up, iRobot? Like, like I can't be the only person that thinks this. Anyways, all right. So general manager, what does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah. So, general manager is, I manage a team, and I surround myself with other leaders, and set the direction, from a commercial to a strategic plan, to grow the company here in the Americas. So, it comes to profits and loss, to bringing talent acquisition and talent retention, to going after a portfolio that we're displacing competition or getting into a different vertical that we feel that we might be strong in and just are not capitalizing. So that's me in a nutshell, is to bring an overall strategic plan, get everybody sitting in the right seats, bringing on the right team, and then really just going to get it. So
what makes you specifically, the right person for this job at this time of the company?
Man, you really jumped deep into the questions, didn't you? I can't say that I am the right person, but I can say that I'm trying my best with the experiences that I have. I can't sit here and pound my chest and say, I'm the guy that's going to take it to the next level. But what I can do is I can offer the opportunity to, have the team see a vision, and maybe, I can never change a mindset, but I can influence a mindset to have them go from good to great, right? Or to bring up new leaders and allow them to express their ideas and really capitalize on the culture. And that's the experiences that I've had in the past, good and bad. And that's what I bring to this position is, okay, I've had experiences where culture was bad, and I was able to come in and really turn everybody into a family, and I think that's what they wanted. And they wanted a culture change for sure when I accepted this position. And they also wanted to retain the talent that was here. But more importantly, they want to grow. They had plateaued. And if you were to look at the company's CAGR over 5 to 7 years, it's like 1 or 2, 3%. And they said, how do we get it off that? And that I do think boils down to a good, solid team with a good, solid vision. Yeah. And it takes time, but with metrics, and that's something that I can bring and I offer. And that's what I'm trying to do today with my team. And I think they appreciate that. So we'll find out, right?
Yeah. Well, I love that. I'm going to get deep on a couple of those things that you talked about, though. Culture is an interesting thing because, culture is kind of like strategy. People are like, oh, often when I hear so-and-so needs to be more strategic, it's just code for I want them to be better, but I don't really know how I want them to be better. So I'm just going to use this placeholder strategy. Like that so-and-so needs to be more strategic. And whenever I ask, well, what does that actually mean to you? I always see people be like,
the struggle, right? What does that mean?
Strategy, you know what I mean? I'm like, no,
it's like chess, right?
No, I don't know what you mean. You tell me. And they're like, I don't know. And I often feel the same with culture when people are like, hey, we want a different culture. I'm like, yeah, well, what kind of culture do you want? What does it look like? It's a good desire to want a better culture in a company and to do more than just want something and to kind of do a few things. You actually have to go after it and be thoughtful and be practical and kind of have a strategy about it. So when you were brought in to do some work about the culture, what's the culture that you envisioned? And then how did you make that happen, or how are you making that happen?
Yeah, my culture is about my word, and it's about transparency of truth. Right. I think people get hurt over time if there's expectations and or promises that haven't been met and or kept. And so I guess the culture that I had brought in was sort of my background, because I do come from a military background. So you're brothers in arms, right? I'm in the trenches with you. Let's go figure it out. So that's the culture I've been trying to bring is, hey, give me more on why you did that. And why is it working? Why is it not working? Whatever that particular that may be, right? So, and people aren't going to listen to you as soon as you come in. In fact, they're going to have reservation about a new leader that's coming in. And that's a tough position to be in. And we could really go down a rabbit hole and have great conversation about being promoted into a position where people know you, and then coming in from a company to another company where they don't know you. To come in and say, I'm changing culture, that's not going to happen. I'm not arrogant enough to say that can happen, but hopefully I can influence culture through integrity and listening skills, but also coaching and just and trust over time. And then it starts to organically happen, because if you're trying to make it happen non-organically, it will and has. It's actually backfired on me. And so I've been down the road of hardship as well, of trying to force culture. And so I have learned from that mistake over the years. And so, I try to be very practical about it and again, let it happen more organically through action.
Let's hit on something though, because I noticed you said this earlier, like, hey, I can't change thinking, but I can influence thinking. And I can't change culture, but I can influence culture. So what does influencing versus changing mean for you?
I think influencing, it's much like you see somebody doing something and you want to emulate. I think emulation is the word. You want to be like that person, right? And I don't want to say that's my hero, but like I want to go to my mom. My mom is a giver. She gives everything. I'll never be able to give as much as my mom, but I look up to her and I want to emulate her as much as I possibly can. And she has then influenced me. So, that's what I want, not only myself, but my direct reports, which are also leaders and have teams, right? I want them and their teams to emulate them and look up to them. That does go back to the culture thing. Like, wow, I want to do that. So, and that's beyond best practices, isn't it? It's like living a lifestyle. It's totally. Like, no, I'm a hard worker. Saying you're a hard worker and actually, putting in the hours and people are noticing it, that influences people. Like, I want to be that. I skated and I still skate today, and when I was a skateboarder, I always wanted to be around the kids that were really good because I wanted to emulate them. I wanted to be that, right? And I wanted to aspire to be that good. It was always nice being around the kids that weren't that good for your ego, but it didn't take you to a next level, and it didn't affect me as to be a better skateboarder. So that's the way I look at work. That's the way I look at, being a leader, is set the example, show them what you're doing, and hopefully they'll see that, and it will influence and change culture of being better. So that's what I mean by influencing.
Well, and that's a great answer. And it sounds like what you're talking about is modeling.
Yeah, for absolutely coaching, modeling, and
Well, from like a perspective of change and change management, like I kind of go to the idea, like, walk it, don't talk it, like just be it and talk about it appropriately, but don't just be like sounding off about it, but you're not really walking it. And I see that a lot in my job. I see a lot of people with like these big ideas. It's like, oh, culture, strategy, leadership. And you just boil it down. It's like, man, you're really, really good at knitting together this like wool sweater of ideas, but like that wool sweater doesn't fit anybody. You've made like a dog sweater for a human being. It makes no sense of what you're talking about. Modeling, strong modeling, mentoring, and coaching is, I 100% believe, is the way that you create like great culture. You have talent retention strategy, all of that stuff. And it's why I do what I do is to help people and companies get there. I want to hit on something though, because there also has to be the decision point. And what I like about what you're saying is, hey, all I can do is like model and influence and create those opportunities. But it's kind of like a handshake. You can put out your hand, but the other person has to decide to stick out their hand and shake as well. And it sounds like you're big on ownership of other people, like owning their part of saying, actually, I'll be the one that makes the change, but I've now been influenced by the ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to touch back on being in the military for some time. One thing that I walked away in my leadership style of being in the military was ownership. you have to own your actions, good, bad, or indifferent. You have to take action, and you have to own it, because at the end of the day, specifically speaking in the Army and in the infantry or civil special operations or whatever you may be in, there's lives that are at risk. And there's equipment that's at risk, and there's so much that's at risk. And being a strong leader in a strong leadership position, you have to own it. So I am constantly making mistakes, and I'm constantly taking risks. Not constantly, I mitigate the risk, but I do have to take risks at times. Mm-hmm. So I think the team, I hope, I can't speak for them. So, this is me assuming, and I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. But through the emulation and through the modeling, as you state, if I do make a mistake, I do tend to own it quickly. And I say, hey, this is on me. I'm the one that pointed in that direction. I said, go do that. And it didn't work, So yeah, that's where I stand on the ownership side. I'm a big advocate of owning your mistakes and the decisions that you make.
Totally. So do you mind if I share with you the stages of change model?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah.
Okay. So in psychology, there is a theory called the trans-theoretical stages of change model. And the reason it's called trans-theoretical is it's like it goes across many different kind of theories and approaches to psychology. I use this a ton in my work. I used it when I was worked in addiction and mental health, and I use it every single day as a coach in the business world. And it's the idea that change is a relatively predictable thing that happens based on certain stages. And the stages are pre-contemplative, contemplative, preparation, action, maintenance. And so it goes in a circle like that. I find that a lot of leaders and organizations, when they're trying to create change, like say they're trying to create a culture change, or they're trying to encourage people to like take on new things or think different ways, they start the conversation in the wrong place. So when you think about these stages, I always think there's like kind of like a question that's in someone's head that's guiding their thinking. So if we're thinking about pre-contemplation, the question is why? Why? Like, I'm not even thinking about change. Why would I change? So if you don't start with like a why, like, hey, like here's this change and here's why this matters, and get into that conversation and not push it like here's this prepackaged why for you, but like work with them in discovering the why for them. If you're not starting there, you're going to be screwed, because it's going to go haywire. Once you get past the why, you get into contemplation. Here, the question is what? Well, what has to change? Like once the why makes sense for someone, the what needs to change, because then they're scaling. Like, are you talking about a huge change or a little change or a medium change? Like, what does that look like? So what's going to change? Then you get into preparation. It's how. How are we going to do this? Right? And so they've gone from like, they've scaled it now, and then they're figuring it out. In action, it's another how question, but this how is like, how am I doing? Or how are we doing? Like it's a heavy feedback cycle. And then you get into maintenance. And I like to think of maintenance as like three things. Like the first is, how do we keep this going? How do we keep from backsliding? Because in maintenance, especially in addiction and mental health, there's like, it's in maintenance that you expect there to be like a bit of relapse. So how do we keep this going? How do we keep from relapsing? Or what's our relapse plan if we get there? How do we step back? But also another question is like, what's next? Like what new height can we go to? So when I think of leaders or organizations and they're like, they're trying to create a change, again, culture change, process change, whatever, they don't start with pre-contemplation. They don't start with contemplation. They start with preparation, or maybe even just action. So either they're like, here's this change and here's how we're going to do it. Or here's this change and here's your marching orders. And here's your action. And like, if we have three different kinds of personality types in the workplace, one is a champion, one's a detractor, and then there's kind of like the middle ground, which are neutral people. Champions, you can drop them anywhere in that stages of change and they'll play with it because they're a champion. They want to go for it. Take a detractor, they're always going to be a couple stages behind. For me, change is always about the neutral people. So if you think of like 100% of your audience, I use like a 20-20-60 rule. 20% detractors, 20% champions, 60% neutral. when companies or leaders are making change, they either usually play to the champions or they play to the detractors. Both are unnecessary. You always play to that 60% in the middle, the neutral people, and that's who you take through the stages of change. The champions will always be a couple stages ahead, or at least like 1 to 2 stages ahead, and the detractors will always be slightly behind. But you put your focus on the neutral people, and that's all about influencing thinking.
Wow, that was very well said, and I'm glad we're recording this.
Well, if you look up the trans-theoretical stages of change model, I usually just call it stages of change for ease of use. There's actually first of all, there's tons of good articles about it. And there's articles like saying like, no, that's not how this works. Or that, like whatever, like contrary articles, which is fine too. Very rarely will I say go to Wikipedia, but there's actually a really good Wikipedia entry on this that's pretty user friendly. When I look at the business world, people talk so much about change, and there's all these articles like the 3 stages of change, the 15 stages of change. It's like, whatever. Go to a therapist. They're going to tell you almost the exact same thing. This is how change happens. It doesn't mean it happens this exact way for every single person, but this is a fairly usable and predictable model. Interestingly enough, I think you naturally do some version of this based on your background in the military, background in punk, and just you as a person. It sounds like this is kind of what you do anyways.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking as you're going through this, like, how could I have done better? And wow, he hit the nail on the head on that. And like, oh, I did touch on that a little bit. It's tough going from a company that I'd been in for a while, and you tend to know everybody, to going to a newer company. And I really had to be prepared, right? And like, how do you do this? Because they don't know me, and I ended up doing this full 90-day, what I would do in the first 90 days, and I presented it to the leaders, and I took it a step further. I said, you know what? I'm going to call every single employee that is in the Americas, and I'm going to talk to every single one of them, and I'm going to ask them the same 5 basic questions. Like, what do you like about Elmo? What didn't you like about Elmo? What did you like about your previous leader? What you didn't like about your previous leader? And where do you want to be, in 3 to 5 years, type of deal? And so I went through every single employee here, and I actually did that interview, and I did it in the first week. I was on the phone a lot, and but it was worth it, and they were worth it, and then I presented that leadership, that 90-day. I tweaked it and I adjusted it, and I went through, and I didn't try to come in and change, but all of a sudden, I'm not even kidding, Aram. I want to say around the 100-day mark, the coining of the phrase "winds of change" started happening. And I really appreciated that, and I was humbled. Honestly, I was just like, wow, this is great, right? So I think the team felt it, and I know the leadership over in Israel, which is where our headquarters is, our global headquarters. They had noticed it right away, and it was very methodic, and it wasn't a forced thing for sure. And everybody had their input on it, and that's important. And I did start off with, what would you like to change? And then build the why around that. Okay, this is what they would like, and then trying to transform. Well, this is the why. The why is growth. The why is retention. The why is they trust and believe and love their products. They just want a nice environment to be moved forward. So,
all right. So that brings me to my next question, and something you'd mentioned. Again, people talk pretty vaguely about retention. And when I say I laugh, I mean, I don't laugh in a mean way, but it's like, you've got to imagine how many times in a day I hear someone be like, talent retention is it's our most important. Now I'm using my voice. That's the voice that I use.
I love when you use the voice.
That's the top thing. And you know what? I know it is your top thing. I totally know.
It is, right?
Totally. But why aren't you doing the things that you need to do? Like, you're talking it. How do you walk it? So like, I know it's complex based on like your company, like the bandwidth of your company, the ability, the financial ability of your company, where you are in the country, what country you're in. There's a lot of nuances here. And talent retention is like very oddly broadly spoken about, but like really rarely I find that people do like a deep dive on like, what does that actually mean? So when we think about talent attraction and retention as a result of like kind of a poor business culture throughout North America, for longstanding poor business culture, but also as also a result of the pandemic and all the pressures that have come through it, companies are bleeding talent left, right, and center. And companies are also like hiring pretty crappy, like what I believe is like kind of like tepid level talent and throwing money at them and all sorts of stuff. It is a vicious cycle that we're in. So if you think about talent retention, what does that actually mean for you?
Yeah, talent retention, what it means is allowing momentum to still continue. Because nothing will kill momentum in a company or within a team than people leaving the team, right? So it's all about the analogy of the Japanese drums, right? You got the troops marching, and the drums go faster, they march faster. But when the troops start to leave the march, you don't have many people marching forward, right? So keeping that momentum, it's really important. So what retention means to me is, are we setting an environment, first of all? So I'm gonna go around the culture, because you could have the best environment in the world. Everybody's got lounges, all the free soda and juices you could drink. You get the free gym membership and this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, I think people want to be the best them, right? Because if you're not learning, you're not living. So you need to empower employees. So for me, retention is setting up the next step for them in their careers, and showing them and coaching them and saying, hey, this is, what do you aspire to be? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Some people are happy where they're at. Others are like, I want to do this. I want to do that. All right. So let's start building that ladder, and let's start building that vision and a plan to get you to that place. So you got the culture, but now they've got learning is living, right? And they're like, I could be better. I could be a better person. Wait, what? And then they tend to want to stick around, right? It is hard today, and it is talked about. I speak with a lot of different leaders like you do. It's spoken about today more than it ever has been. There's even articles about the Great Resignation. I'm using voice now. The Great Resignation. I was just reading about this. People have now been at home working, sitting back and thinking, yeah, I like the family feel, and all the perks have gone away though. Those that are working at Google, or, I'm not going to mention some of the big names, but some of these guys, they don't get to go in the office anymore, right? But they're thinking, how do I be better? Do I have that work-life balance? Am I going to be the best me in 3, 5, 10 years? I think when it comes to retention, I know when it comes to retention, we as leaders need to start treating our employees almost like you want your child to be a better version of you, right? So I've got 4 wonderful kids, and my whole job and my wife's whole job is to make sure that they're not little jerks, contributing members of society, and more importantly, they're happy. Are they happy when they get home, right? So, and if they cover those 3 bases, then I've succeeded. And I think when it comes to employees, hey, are they contributing members to the team? Yes. Are they doing it with diplomacy and not being jerks, right? And are they happy?
Yeah.
That's really what it boils down to.
Do you mind if I share with you like what I believe is kind of the right combination of how to look at things to have good retention and good engagement with teams?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
I believe there's 4 things that really, really matter to have like a super engaged, happy team that you can retain and really have that sense of like, we're in this together, we're moving together. It's connection to the boss, connection to the team, liking what you do, and how much, what the perks are of the job. And I actually think it goes in that order. I believe the biggest decider of whether or not someone stays in a company is their connection to their boss, and not about whether they like their boss. Because to me, that's like not a factor. More so, it's that, is their boss invested in their growth and success? Are they learning from their boss? Like, are they showing up and feeling like stretched and challenged, and like, they've got someone who's like, I'm going to help this person grow. You could actually dislike your boss, think your boss is like a total corny whatever, like you're not into them. But if it's someone that is invested in you and is putting you into things that are challenging in a positive way, they're giving you opportunity, they're investing their time and their mentorship in you, they're influencing your thinking, they're not like command control bosses.
Absolutely.
if you have that, that's the number one, for me, the number one ingredient in having strong retention.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't speak for you, but I think people have, if they've been in the industry long enough, they've had those bosses that were invested,
Mm-hmm.
and then they've had the ones that weren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you always talk about the horror stories of the weren't invested,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I 100% agree.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you like them or how they treat. But if they're vested in you, that's what really matters at the end of the day, and it makes you feel grounded, and it makes you feel like you're going to go somewhere, and you're learning. You're actually, people equity, I call it.
And you could like your boss, and your boss could still suck, because they could be nice, they could treat you well, but they don't do anything for you. Like, that sucks. So number one is your connection to your boss. Number two is your connection to your team. And again, it's not whether or not you like your team, but it's like you're in something together, you're moving together, like ease of process. Like, you can get things done well together. You might not like want to have them over for dinner or go out for drinks or whatever it is, but you work well together. There's a strong cohesiveness. The third thing is liking what you do. And it's actually like fairly far down. Like, I've met many people who are like, yeah, what I do, I'm fine on. It's not like my life's passion, but I love working for my boss and I love my team. That is huge. And the final thing that I find that people practically care about in terms of retention, is how much they get paid, what the perks are, and all of that. What's funny though, when people aren't happy at work, it's like the first thing they talk about, or very often one of the first things they talk about. And culture now, it's like business culture now, companies are like dumping tons of money and benefits and perks at people. It's like, no, like, take that money, invest it in great leaders, and you're gonna see a difference. In North America, like, I kind of look at this as like a checklist. In North America, we're raised with this idea, like, everything's supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to really love our boss, really love our team, really love our job, and get paid really well. Right. But that's like a real North America thing. I know you've done international business. You go other places. People, like, they don't have that idea of things being perfect like that. And the thing I often encourage people to think about is, like, what's the combination that matters the most to you? Is it you don't actually care that your boss sucks? You're fine with liking your team, liking your job, and liking your pay? Or is it that you like your pay and you like what you do, but you hate your team and you hate your boss, but that's okay for you? It's rare to get all four of those things, but what combination works for people for them to care about staying in a company? And that's what I always encourage people to think about.
Yeah. I agree. And it is case by case. And I also think it depends on where you are in your life as a team member, because your mindset changes over time. We do a great exercise here that what I end up doing is I give them a sheet, and it's got like 20 things that what's important to you. And you have to label them 1 to 20, number 1 being the most important thing. And I have them redo this exercise probably every 2 years. And you will see priorities shift, and some of the selections might be, to your point, a great team. I want a good culture, or income, or a future plan, or I want good technology, or, a stable work-life balance, this, that, and the other. So these are some of the selections. What's fascinating is if you do this with a tenured employee over time, as they're going through their stages of life, they're having kids, money's important, job security. They're like, no, I got to be able to support my family, provide and protect. But then as time has gone on, they're like, well, I really need good culture, good work-life balance, and stability. Stability is still there. But the money tends to weed itself out as they progress in their careers. So you have to find out what motivates your team members.
Yeah.
And I think good leaders, they'll dig deep to find out individually what motivates each one of their team leaders to get the best of them, but also to retain them.
Totally. All right, man. Are you ready to talk about punk?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
All right. So again, for the uninitiated, tell us about your journey through punk and hardcore, like how you got into it, where you grew up, like what was kind of the gateway drug to it, and then the impact on your life.
Yeah, the impact on my life was Buffalo hardcore music. I come from Buffalo, New York, and I in the mid to late 80s. I'm aging myself here, but that's skateboarding and hardcore was starting to really take off in the Buffalo region. We had a great club called the River Rock Cafe, which is very well known in the hardcore scene these days. And I remember being in 6th and 7th grade, and my dad dropping me off. There was a General Motors plant that was down that River Rock was on a road called River Road, and there was a huge GM plant, very blue collar town, by the way. And my dad worked at GM, and he would drop me off and go to at the River Rock Cafe, and I was in 7th grade, mind you, and he's just like, you'll find your way home. And I did. I found my way home, which was pretty far from where I lived. I lived in like North Tonawanda, this little town in between Niagara Falls and Buffalo. And, but how I got into it was just skateboarding. There was a great neighborhood friends that were all into the music, people that have gone on to be in a lot of the big Buffalo bands that we know today, and from Buried Alive to, Snapcase and so forth, and Slugfest and some of the older ones, Zero Tolerance. And, this is really what I cut my teeth on, so Garrett Klon went up to my high school, Scott Sprigg, who was in Buried Alive and so forth. We all went to the same high school together. There's so many kids that were from this small little town called North Tonawanda, that we all ended up being in a ton of different bands over the years, from Extinction to all the different bands that Jeremy Smith was in, Dead Hearts and so forth, and Plagued with Rage. And we were loving and living the dream, quite frankly. That was a good time. Some of the shows after the River Rock Cafe had sort of ceased, and they were far and few in between. And I was in about 10th grade at the time, and I decided to start promoting shows in 10th grade. And my dad would take me downtown Buffalo, and I'd look at certain different clubs, and I started, I'm trying to be witty here, in my 10th grade self. And I said, I'm going to call it ZYX Productions. And I started doing small shows, and I would bring in some of the local bands. And, I became pretty good friends with the guys from Doghouse Records, so Majority One and Duncan and all the team from Endpoint and all those guys. We all became pretty close. Dwid and Integrity and Urba with Face Value. And I would bring in some of those bands and, Naked Angel and all. Oh, it's such a good time. And I got to know a lot of those, Stormy and all the Rev people. But the thing is, I was in 10th grade. So I actually not only made good friends, and life is about relationships, but because of my immaturity at the level, I think I actually burnt some bridges as well as time, because there was no way to communicate besides a phone call long distance, right? So I remember I was talking to Jay, the drummer of Mouthpiece, and Mouthpiece just came out with 7-inch, and they were blowing up, and Jay had written me on the back of a record thing, and he said, Jim, we can't make it in, we're so sorry. And I got the mail the day before the show was supposed to happen. And they were my headlining band, and I'm like, oh no. Well, Endpoint and Split Lip was supposed to play the same show. Split Lip called me the day of the show and said they couldn't make it in because of a storm. And I couldn't get a hold of Endpoint because they were coming in from Louisville to Buffalo, which is a haul, by the way. It's like a 10-hour drive or something like that, a 9-hour drive. And I can't get a hold of them. And so kids are showing up at that show that night, and they're mad at ZYX Productions, me, like, where's the bands? Scott Vogel got up on there, and Slugfest put on an amazing show. And all of a sudden, here comes the guys from Endpoint pulling up in their van. And it's just like a sigh of relief. But it was that moment in my life that I knew that I did have the knack for business, and I liked, dealing with people. And that's how hardcore and punk really influenced me. From a lot of hardships and burning some bridges, by the way, but also making great relationships and friends. I went away in the Army. I got married. I was stationed all over the place, and I actually took a pause from hardcore from probably about 96 to 2001. I was still straight edge. I didn't, I was still vegetarian, the whole 9 yards, but I just wasn't going to shows. I was always like months behind the greatest and latest thing when you're traveling, living in Germany or something like that. I came back and I moved to Connecticut, and then I started doing promotion of shows again and getting back into it, and making great friends and relationships. And I've been in some bands myself, and that's my association with hardcore, and it's who I am, and it's part of my life. It's in my DNA, and my team members that directly report to me, Aram, they found out I've been in some bands, and they found some stuff on YouTube. And I wasn't hiding it. I'm not going to lie. I don't hide it. I'm not embarrassed by any means, but it was entertaining for them to say, "Hey, so tell us about Generations," and I'm just like, oh boy.
Well, you're really not doing a good job of hiding it. It's actually on the wall behind you.
Yeah,
so,
it is. It is. Yeah, and I'm very proud of all those guys. We're all really close today, and I'm still friends with all of them today.
So. Well, and just to be clear for anyone who, because James, people come to this podcast from all sorts of different backgrounds, like punk and hardcore for sure, but there's like people from the business culture, people from like art, music, social activism, like athletics, like a lot of different people listen to this podcast. So for anyone who doesn't have a background in punk and hardcore, the names he was dropping there, like Dwid, like Scott Vogel, like all these people, these are people who have been major contributors to our culture. I want to give a special shout out to Duncan from Endpoint, who I really like as a person. And I think he's just a great person, a great writer, interesting cat. Yeah, good. Really good dude.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to name drop. I was just giving this story.
I love it. I know. We want. I think
it was Duncan who left his shoes on top of a van once and thought we stole them from him, and they drove away as they were heading back on tour. And Duncan and I, we've had some pretty interesting early stories. He's such a good guy.
Who would steal someone's stinky tour shoes?
Exactly.
Give me a break.
They just got sponsored by Vans, so at that time, it was a big deal. But
all right, man. Let's talk about though, like punk and hardcore. You learned a lot of lessons that, like, I mean, you're in grade 6, you're being dropped off at this like place, and like Zero Tolerance, for example, you're being like, I just imagine your dad like throwing you into the pit at a Zero Tolerance show and you being like, I'm going to survive this. Clearly, punk and hardcore had an influence on who you are and what you felt you're capable of. You're at grade 10 and you're booking bands from all over North America and bringing to your town. So what'd you learn about leadership from growing up a punk?
The one thing that I have learned over the years is diversity of acceptance. Mm-hmm. So I guess I need to define this a little bit. And it actually sort of stems, and it helped me in the military. The thing about punk hardcore is there's people from all over cultures and all over walks of life. Mm-hmm. And everybody has a value. And when I was in the hardcore scene, I was having some really amazingly intense and satisfying conversations. But people that were all over the place. I mean, when I was growing up, we had pen pals. So I was talking to kids in Germany, in Republic of Korea, Japan. Maximum Rock and Roll magazine. We loved that. I did pen pals all the time through that, and I learned to accept the diversity of people and embrace it, and listen to their backgrounds and what they bring. And although I might not have maybe agreed or necessarily even understood, from religion to their political views to, their sexual orientation to their stand on animal rights, it's just like, or, oh, okay. Or, wow, holy, that's really deep, and that was what really added to my leadership. When I joined the Army, again, people from all sorts of walks of life, from the people that were extremely athletic and came from pretty prosperous families that just said, I want to serve my country, to those that were like, I can't afford anything else. To the other people more like me, which was a humble beginning, but I think I needed discipline in my life. Like, I needed structure. That's who I was when I was growing up. Like, I hit that 17, 18. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wasn't smart enough for university yet. And I definitely wasn't disciplined enough. So the military helped me in that aspect. And that was the reason I joined. So the punk hardcore scene, it allowed me to be introduced to all these amazing, what I'll call a paint template that the good Lord has given us, and appreciate all those cultures and those walks of life. And it's made me a better leader, a better person. And it's what I strive for my team is I want to learn about them and who they are. So rapport is power.
I love that. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the military. But before we get into it, I want to tell you about my near brush with the military. How I almost joined the military.
Wait, Canada has a military? I thought it was the U.S.
Oh no. We are truly armed to the teeth in Canada. I just want you to remember that. So here's my brush with almost joining the military. Well, the Air Force is what I had my eyes set on. I joined the Air Cadets in Canada, and I was like really, really psyched on being in the Air Cadets. And so I went.
What is that? What's an Air Cadet? I'm sorry.
So an Air Cadet what's the program that you guys have in your high schools where you're kind of, it's like sort of, what is it? The ROTC?
ROTC. Yeah.
It's kind of
like an officer, like military. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of something like that. It's basically like, it's a way of getting like engaging in military culture and learning about like an arm of the military without, obviously you're too young to be in the military. I was in like junior high maybe. And I was a skateboarder, and I was like, I want to be in the Air Force. And I really wanted to be in the Air Force ever since I was like a little kid. And, it's because I grew up with action movies and then was like, all the things you think, right? But I also really needed discipline because I was like a total wild man and out there. So I went to this thing, and this is what happened. My parents were like, whew, this guy's finally going to, get some discipline. And I went in. And first thing they told me I had to cut my hair, which was not flying because I had like a glorious skater, like Tony Hawk thing going on. And I know that's hard to imagine with my current state of hair, but that was the look. But this was the thing that really pushed it over the top. So we would go every Thursday to this Air Cadets meeting, and it was a number of hours that you were there. I think you were there for like 3 hours, and you were learning about the military. You were learning about the Air Force, like history. It was basically like going to school. Plus, there was like a military structure. So you're like, sir, yes, sir, and like there's ranks and all of that kind of stuff. There was eventually like camps that you go to. You go and do stuff. You could move up the ranks. So I didn't have my uniform yet. And so I was told to report to the command center, or like whatever they called it, like command. And they would hold these meetings at like a local junior high, and the command center was like a portable unit, like how those portable classrooms. And I walked in, and I go in the door, and there's a guy sitting behind the desk, and I walk in, and he said, "Private." And I said, "Sir, yes, sir." "Were you raised in a barn?" "Sir, no, sir." "Well, then why'd you leave the door open like you live in a barn?" And I turn around, and I'd left the door open because it just didn't have like, like a
latch.
Yeah. And I remember looking at this dude and just thinking like, if we were in the streets, like if this was like normal life, you would never dare speak to me like that, because like, I'm like, a skateboarder who's used to skateboarding downtown, and you're just some like dude who's like, how dare you speak to me like that? And it was the first time I ever thought that I ever really made that connection between like power and structure enables people to be shitty, right? Like it allows people who if they met you in an equal footing would never dare speak to you like that, allows someone to speak to you in a way because they have like the power of structure. And I quit. I literally like walked out the door, and I went home, and my dad's like, "What happened?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to let some like total, like some guy like flex on me like that." And it's been such a thing in my life where I think I could have used that discipline, but what I couldn't handle is people who allow power and specifically structure to enable shitty behavior. And now that's like such a tepid little thing. I was like a little kid, so I was just being reactive and rebellious. But of course, you see that throughout like structure of like abuses of power, people acting like idiots. And if you were to meet people on an equal ground, how they would never dare to act like that. But it's power that allows them to do that. Growing up in punk and hardcore allowed me to really engage with that thinking. And it also, of course, made me a bit of a ridiculous human being where I thought all power was bad. When in reality, there's like a mix of people. Like you can have people and that's what leadership is people who are like thoughtful people who do have a power, but they don't lead from power. They lead from influence and thoughtfulness and a desire to help and help everyone grow. You're someone that I think really represents that. Now, I went on a bit of a tangent about my Air Cadets thing. Tell me about your time in the military.
Yeah, before I do that, your experience reminds me of that saying, a leader without a title is better than a title without the ability to lead, right?
Right,
when you give somebody a title, they think they're automatically a leader, and they try to abuse power, if you will. And that's really sad. And that does, by the way, happen in the military as often as it doesn't happen in the military, So my time in the military, I come from a humble beginning. And I remember asking my mom, I said, "Hey, do we got money for college?" And it was right at the beginning of my senior year. And my mom starts laughing. I'm not even joking. And it really resonated. And I got mad. I got so mad. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "I can't afford that." And I looked at her, and I kid you not, and she'd probably kill me that I'm saying this. I said, "Ma, you just bought a $2,000 rainbow vacuum cleaner, and you couldn't put any money away for me to go to college." Yeah. Little do I know, she's probably on this like 10-year payment plan for this, $2,000 vacuum cleaner. So I was a selfish little arrogant jerk at the time. But I got a phone call, and it was on a Friday afternoon, because we used to go to church on Friday nights. We had a worship at our church, my family church. And I remember I came home from school, and it had to be around 4:00 or something like that. And the phone rang, and I answered it, and I said, "Hey, how are you? We're gonna help you." And then it was some recruiter on the other line, and he said, "Oh, I'm looking for James Bach." And I said, "This is James." And he was just like, "Hey, James, I heard you're about to graduate high school this year, coming up, and we just wonder what you have planned." And the vacuum cleaner being fresh in my head, I said, I don't have anything planned. Actually, I haven't figured that out yet. And I was honest. I was very vulnerable in this conversation. And he said, he goes, "Well, I'd like to sit down and talk to you about you joining the United States Army." And I kid you not, I said, "Why don't you show up tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we'll talk about it." And I hung up the phone. I never gave him my address. I never, said anything else. I just hung up the phone. And my thinking behind it was, if he knew my number and he knew my name, I'm assuming he knows where I live. Everybody's got a phone book back then. And he showed up at 10 a.m. We're sitting in my dining room table. My house was set up very linear. So kitchen, dining room, living room, and it was pretty open concept. And I remember my mom walking downstairs, coming in the living room, and she sees this Army guy sitting across from me, and she turned white. And I said, "Yeah, I'm interested in this." And it was at the end of the conversation, and he left. And I said, I'm gonna go sign up with the Army in the Buffalo MEPS on tomorrow evening, on a Sunday evening. And my mom just looked at me, "Why?" And I said, "Well, what else am I going to do?" And I think at first she was just shocked, because her oldest was joining the Army, and mind you, the Gulf War was just winding down. So Bush was still in house, and Clinton was about to come in, and so there was all these unknowns, and it was a bit scary for my mom, and honestly, it was one of the best things I had done. Now, if you would ask me, Aram, 2 years into being in the Army, if I would have done 21, almost 22 years, I would have looked at you and started laughing. I would have been like, "Heck no, I'm out." But time went on, and I did the citizen soldier thing, where I did, my active duty, and then I was able to pursue a career, and they paid for my university. And at that moment, I was ready. I was mature enough. They helped me be mature. And I got a funny story about me being mature in the Army. Can I?
Yeah.
So I was going through basic training, and I was fairly physically fit. I wrestled in junior high and high school, and of course I was a skateboarder, avid skateboarder. I was fairly physically fit. So when I joined the Army, it just made sense for me, I guess. And I, much like you, I'd seen all the, I wanted to be the next Rambo, right? So growing up in that 80s culture of violent movies, and I joined the Army. I'm in basic training. It is rough. All these guys are tenured Vietnam vets. And these guys had, 20 years in, they were all in Vietnam. They were in the shit.
The trainers.
Yeah, the trainers, the drill sergeants, right? And so I was at this cusp of hardcore basic training where they were still allowed to touch you, but they weren't supposed to touch you, but they were still smacking you around a little bit here and there. And, I was having a rough time because I was a rebel.
Right.
I'm going to give it to the man, and, I know best type of deal. And, but I was also a natural leader. So some of the other troops were sort of gathering around me. We took this PT test, and what they ended up doing is whoever had the highest score was on this grade rank thing. And they said, hey, if you scored this, raise your hand. Well, nobody's hand raised because it was at the top of the bar. Well, they went down a level. And if you scored this, raise your hand, and 2 hands go up. And who are the 2 hands? There's my hand and another kid, right? Mm-hmm. And they pointed at me and they said, "You're the platoon leader for the platoon." That was a bad mistake for James. I got fired in 24 hours. It's my first real leadership position, and I got fired in 24 hours. And how they fired me is in the mornings. It's a barrack. And there's 2 black lines, and they'll say, toe the line, and everybody yells, toe the line, drill sergeant, toe the line. You run to the line, and you literally put your toes on the line. You're not allowed to walk in the middle. That middle is for the drill sergeants only. Don't get caught walking in the middle. If they're walking by the barrack and they see somebody in the middle, they'll let you have it. And I remember we're all towing the line, and I hadn't been fired yet. It's been less than 24 hours. And they said, Private Bach, enter my realm. And I step over the line and I'm the first, not even a soldier yet, because I haven't passed basic training. I'm the first trainee that's been asked to enter into their realm, their space, if you will. And I'm like sweating bullets. I'm like, oh no. So I enter his realm, and he looks at me, and then I'm standing at parade rest, like I'm all at attention parade rest. I'm like, yes, drill sergeant. He looks at everybody, the 30 some odd trainees, and he said, I want everybody to look at Sergeant Bach here, or Private Bach, I'm sorry. And this is the worst effing leader you will ever see in your life. He has failed you beyond, all recognition. And he went on for what felt like an eternity. It was probably 3 minutes, but it felt like an eternity, and just embarrassed me. And then he said, toe the line. And I took a step backwards and I put my toes back in the line. At that moment, I knew I had potential to be a leader, but I wasn't ready.
How had you failed everybody? What was the failure?
We weren't. So everybody showed up in formation in the mornings. We were late. The barracks weren't clean. Everybody's uniforms were ragtag. They were going to beat anybody up that was in that position, by the way. But they would call out every little thing. By the way, I was the guinea pig. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. I hadn't been in the military. I wasn't set up for success. Let's put it that way.
The barracks wasn't clean?
The barracks wasn't clean enough.
I bet you wish you had that fancy vacuum now instead of joining the military because of a vacuum.
So, but I did realize at that point that I wasn't ready to be a leader and I wasn't prepared to be a leader. And I remember talking to some of the other trainees at the time, and it's like, nobody was going to succeed. They didn't tell me what to do. They didn't give me timelines. They didn't give me the expectations. They didn't set the bar, if you will. Right. And by the end, I actually ended up getting that position again, and I held it for pretty much till graduation. And then that was my first time being a leader. I got fired within 24 hours.
Man, first of all, that's sick. But second, like what you said is like, there's no real expectations, no real, any of the stuff. Isn't that like almost every single leadership job that people actually step into? Like very often people are like, oh, we're hiring this job, but you get there and you're like, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, I don't know, go figure it out. And your success and failure is your ability whether or not you figure it out.
Absolutely. I think some of the best leaders are the ones that do allow leniency, because I think some people like the leniency to be empowered to lead, especially if those middle management positions are so hard.
Brutal.
They're brutal, man. I mean, because you got multiple leaders above you. they're pulling you in multiple directions, and they're what I would call white noise, right? So your job is to be the advocate of your team, and you're trying to filter that white noise. But then you got the team that's looking up at you and direction, and and if you're in one of those middle management positions, and you don't have a solid leader that sort of gives you a little bit of parameters and puts their arm around you and says, "Hey, I'm going to give you leniency on this. I'm not going to create a fence, and I'm not going to be this helicopter leader that's going to be guiding you every step of the way. But I'm going to give you this tiny little fence. How about that, right? This is what I tell my team. I'll give you this tiny little fence. So if you want to butt against it, it's there. But at times, if you need to, step over it, man, right? Do it with cause and do it to the best of mitigating all risks and accountability, and always be ethical. But if need be, at least that there's boundaries and barriers. And I'm still going to sit down with you weekly, if not multiple times during a week, and give you suggestions, or give you ideas if you ask. Because if you don't ask, I don't want to be that guy that tells you to do every single thing every single day. So I think that there's a leader that could probe future leaders as well, or those middle management leaders, or even I would say manage up. I manage my leaders up. Like, I need feedback. Like, hey, what do you want? I think that's really hard for leaders. And at least as a young leader, a few years ago, I had a hard time going to my boss and saying, well, what is it that you need? They'll give a command, and I felt like I should have done something, and then I would do it wrong. And then they'd come back to me like, that's not what I wanted. And I'm like, and all I had to do was ask, right? So I think that open communication, it's two ways. You got to manage up and you have to manage down. So talk. It's okay to ask a question. And, that's my piece of advice for all future leaders, current young leaders, and even senior leaders. Ask more questions to your team, ask more questions to everybody reports to somebody. Ask more questions. If you don't fully understand, or even if you think you understand, get clarification. Clarification verbally is also better than getting it through email, by the way. Pick up the phone, build that rapport again.
3 questions. 3 questions is running off. All right. And as a starting point, how long have you been in your GM role here at Elmo Motion?
So this role, I've been here for 20 months.
Okay. So first question is, what do you know about yourself now that you didn't know about yourself at the beginning of this position?
Man, I wish you would have prepped me with that question. That's a good question. What do I know about myself today? I would have to say that good people don't make good leaders. And, since I've been in this position, I've met some really good team members that may have been or currently are in wrong positions. And I've learned to have some harder talks, but with diplomacy, instead of letting it sit. That is something that I hadn't had a ton of challenge in the past. So I've learned that I didn't like to have those uncomfortable conversations about, hey, we need to move you. And I think I've gotten better at it over the past 2 years or 20 months.
I just want to reframe that. It's like, just because someone's a good person doesn't mean they're going to be a good leader.
Exactly.
Yeah. I agree. I know tons of wonderful, wonderful people who are nightmarish leaders. And part of them being nightmarish leaders is because they're just such good people and everyone likes them, but they don't move things forward. They don't give feedback. They don't do this. They don't do that. And it also doesn't mean that someone who's like a total bastard is naturally a good leader. It's that the assumption that because someone's nice and friendly and like can get along, is charismatic, that they're going to lead well. It's a terrible assumption to make, and it could lead to a very toxic culture.
I did learn that over the past 20 months.
Heck yeah. All right. Second one. This is a tough one.
I love it.
Zero tolerance bad blood versus This World Rejected self-titled.
Oh man. Two totally different they're two totally different things.
That's all right, man. All right, I'll make it easier. I'll make it easier for you.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance bad blood versus zero tolerance fuel the fire.
Oh man, that Fuel the Fire, that first guitar riff off that very first song, I was blown away by it. But when it comes to high impact records and that first 7-inch, that's what I grew up on. And I'm gonna go with 7-inch on that one.
All right, man. All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 7-inch on that.
Okay, last question, man. So, people, like I said earlier, people come to this podcast for all sorts of reasons, and from all sorts of different backgrounds. And sometimes it's just like, oh, that person's in punk and they're in like a real job. What's that about? And other times people are like, oh, I'm very interested in that company and I'd like to know about the leadership. There's all sorts of reasons. What do you want to leave our audience with today about your philosophy of leadership? So when you think about leadership, what does that actually mean for you?
Success is a team sport. Mm-hmm. Don't try to do it by yourself. Mm-hmm. That's what I want to impart on everybody. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you include and empower, and you ask open-ended questions and allow your team to communicate feedback. Allow them to give and voice their opinions, even if they're just on an edge and you need to talk them off the razor's edge. Let them voice it out. And hear them, because sometimes there's going to be a golden nugget in there that is going to take your team from good to great. And it's just a matter of empathetic listening, and just let them. People want to be good. At the core, people want to be great. So I would say that keep that in mind as a leader. And that's what I want to impart on everybody is, make sure that you include your team on everything. Be very open in communication and transparent, and make sure they understand the vision. Show them the vision and why you're trying to get there. And they'll buy in and do it not by shooting from the hip. Do it with well thought insight. So
we covered a lot today. We covered, like growing up in the punk scene. We covered your military background, your current role. We talked about integrity. We talked about endpoint. We talked about slugfest. We talked about zero tolerance. Like, man, we really got into a lot. So James, thank you so much for being on the show. And everyone, we'll see you in the outro. Spencer, drop the beat.